Yep.
Hello and welcome to episode 255 of the Daily Fantasy Edge. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the analysts here at DraftKings. I, of course, am the father of the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry. And today we have a very special guest. This is undoubtedly the best dressed man in DFS. This is a guy always doing unique and data-driven things in the gambling space, which I find fascinating. Someone who I think maybe is going to explore the sports betting market, which we'll get into. It is, of course, Max Steinberg, aka one half of the Steinberg twins, aka M Steinberg '09 on DraftKings. Max, what's going on?
Hey, just having a nice little morning. I'm happy to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
The first time I ever heard of Max, I think was, a long time ago, maybe like 2012 or 2013. And I was just watching TV and I was watching poker on TV. And there's this dude in this like ridiculously nice suit, like obviously sticks out like a sore thumb, like among all these like schlubs and disgusting people, like sticks out like a sore thumb. And then he was doing things that no one else did at the time, right? Like at the time in 2012 and 2013, I think everyone was, min raising pre, and I see Max out here like 3xing and 4xing, overbetting the pot on the river and stuff like that. Things that I think are more common now. I don't want to get into poker strategy or even poker that much, but how did you come up with doing these things that no one else was doing at the time? And to that end, how did you come up with wearing a suit when everybody else looks disgusting?
Coming up with I'll just answer the suit question first. I think it was actually my twin brother and older brother's idea. It was just before one of my first World Series of Poker final tables, and we were just chatting, and one of them suggested, like, why don't you dress nice? And so I got a nice button down and put on a tie. I didn't have a suit, I think, with the first time, and I ended up doing really well. And I was like, why don't I just do this every time? And luckily for me, it happened. I final tabled a lot of tournaments, and eventually I kind of ended up having this little obsession with suits, and now I have way too many that I don't wear. So that's how it started. As for just like raise size things I think I'm like a naturally contrarian person. I think almost to like a fault. Like in daily fantasy, nothing excites me more than playing someone who's like 1% owned. I actually was listening to your podcast the other day, and I think you're like hating on people like that. That's me. I was listening to that and laughing because I'm like, oh no, that's actually me. Like if I can find that guy that no one else has thought of and I'm playing them a lot, I'm just so happy. So I think I'm always just thinking about what are people doing that I don't agree with. And I think with poker, it was, I remember thinking about the logic behind people making small raises, which was basically, in a tournament, the antes are so big. And if you make a really small raise, you're getting really great odds on the raise because the pot's just so big. And I thought about it and I was like, well, wait a second, the pot is just really big because of the antes. You don't have to, even if you make a 3x or 4x size, you're still getting great odds on your raise if you take it down, like a third of the time or not that often. I forget the math and I'm spacing out, but I just thought, oh, I could make it bigger, get way more fold equity, and this could be really, really effective. And I just don't even have to play post flop as much. And then I realized people's counter strategies were 3-betting me really small, which is great because I can just call every time. And I just was like, wow, I like the strategy so much better than small raising, and it seems mathematically sound, so I'm just going to do it.
You decided to scale back on poker in favor of DFS a few years ago, I think. Tell me what went into the decision to do that. Did you bring strategies over? Did you immediately start playing GPPs? How'd you, why, I guess, is the best question.
Yeah. So I was living in Las Vegas, and this is actually this was in 2015 where I decided to do this because I was living in Las Vegas and I was playing daily fantasy full time. I basically, my first year playing, I had immediate success, and I think I made like $100,000 the first year I played, starting with like $1,000, and then my next year I was doing really well. And what I do is I do daily fantasy from basically 9 to 4, and then I go to the casino and play poker for like 8 or 9 hours. And eventually I just was reflecting on it, and I thought, wow, I'm actually not very happy doing this. This is just way too much gambling. Like if I lost in poker and lost in DFS on the same day, I was miserable. So poker has, the trajectory was just sort of going like slowly down. It's getting a lot tougher, and it's still getting a lot tougher. And daily fantasy was new, and it was really simple and easy. And it was like, for the people who didn't play prior to like the end of 2015, it was like you'd play a tournament or you'd play a cash game, and someone would just be dead. Like they'd have an injured player. It wasn't like what it is nowadays, where everyone is like, has pretty good lineup construction. They know what they're doing. Like it just wasn't like that at all. So I'm like, wow, this is just so much easier. I like the 9 to 4 lifestyle a lot better. And I just thought, I'm just going to do this. And this was actually before the 2015 main event. So I sort of quit poker, and then I played the 2015 main event, and I ended up final tabling it, which is just absurdly lucky as well. So that was a great year.
How did you go about learning DFS? I mean, were you super into sports? Were you super into fantasy? How did you teach yourself how to play DFS and turn that 1,000 into 100? Because I was playing then, and believe me, I did not turn 1,000 into 100. It's not, I don't think, as easy as you made it sound.
Yeah. Well, I think what happened was my twin brother, Danny, who you mentioned earlier in the podcast, he just got second in this DraftKings sports betting event. But he started getting into it, and we just talked strategy, and it sort of was the same thing as trying to learn online poker. Like I looked for online resources. I would just sort of try to think about the game, think about simple strategies, read as much as possible. And I don't know. I thought it was, at least at the start, it came pretty easily to me. Now it's so much more complex, and your strategies have to be really, really complex, especially in tournaments, in order to have an edge. But back then it was, if you just, and also one other thing I used to do, which was sort of like really ridiculous, but I think very smart, is I would just look at the Thursday contest and just look at who the good players played before, especially in NFL. And so I'd look at what the good players are playing, and then I just say, okay, do I agree with this? Do I disagree with this? And then just sort of use that as like a baseline for my core plays. It was just like, it was much easier. There was just so much less protection. It was such a Wild West sort of vibe. It just was, there are certain ways where you could just get a leg up very easily. And then eventually I learned how to do stuff on my own later.
People don't realize, I think, that back then in 2015, not only was Thursday night part of the main slate, but also you could see everybody's full lineup on Thursday. It wasn't hidden, and it seems so crazy looking back at it now. But yeah, that's what Max is referring to, if you guys don't remember.
Yeah, and even if like you could deduce, even when they started hiding it, there's still little tricks where you could deduce it by like joining a 3-man with 2 good players and see if you had shared players. And it was just, or like looking at ownership of a high stakes contest versus low stakes contest. There's just a lot of things you could do. And I rode that for a while.
Did you focus on tournaments right away? It sounded like you played some cash, and now are you focusing exclusively on tournaments?
I initially played both, which is same with poker. I think both sort of formats appeal to me, and especially, and I'd play leagues. I'd play everything. But later in my DFS career, I played almost exclusively tournaments, and actually more recently, so I guess we'll get into this later, but I actually, this past year, I basically took the year off to start focusing on data science and computer programming in hopes that I would get a job. So as of lately, I've been sort of playing tournaments and dabbling in them every so often, but I don't actually play that often.
Um, I do want to get into that because people are going to be shocked. They're going to say Max has the dream. He plays poker. He plays DFS. He has his money. Why is he looking for a job? So
Yeah.
I'm gonna get into that in a minute here. I do want to mention though that like if you Google your name, like one of the most popular things that comes up is Max Steinberg turned $27 into 2 million, which is like so like it's true, but it's misleading. I think right because like yeah you got into the World Series main by playing a DK satellite. This was when DraftKings ran satellites to the World Series of Poker main event. So you played a $27 satellite on DraftKings, right? Won it, finished fourth for
Right.
2 million. But like most like you obviously had the money. You could have just bought in anyways. It makes it sound like you were like some poor person who like had $27 to his name and turned it into 2 million.
Right. Yeah, I would have played it regardless. I was just playing the satellites because I thought I'm playing this regardless, might as well, and
Yeah.
they'd get overlay, and then I won one, and then that was that. But I mean, yeah, if I obviously I would have played it anyway. But who knows? Maybe the DraftKings money was lucky.
um, where do you come out on the MME discussion? Because I had Manny Laura on a few weeks ago, and I know like some Drew Dinkmeyer, who obviously I have a ton of respect for, has moved to more focusing on MME. I'm intrigued by trying to get better at MME. I'm not sure it suits me that well. And as I said to Manny, I think there's a part of it that's like, hey, this isn't really fantasy sports. This is more computer programming. This is more understanding how to use optimizing software, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you come in on the MME stuff? In other words, for those guys who don't know, MME just means mass multi-entry, putting in 150 lineups to tournaments.
Yeah. So I actually usually do mass multi-entry on FanDuel, and I don't do it as much on DraftKings. And especially in basketball, I feel like having just a few lineups is a huge advantage with late swap because um, you can just, if there's late news, you can so much more easily manipulate your lineups. Like there's just no way you can manipulate 150 lineups on late news. So I think you're going to have a bigger edge just making a few lineups. And obviously, the more lineups you make, the less optimal lineups you're going to include. So you have to be confident that every single one of those lineups has an edge, which is maybe wishful thinking. So a lot of people clearly, are skeptical of mass multi-entry. They think it's like some form of like, maybe not cheating, but they just think, oh, if you just throw 150 lineups there, something good is going to happen. And yeah, I listened to your podcast with Manny. I agree with him. People who do that, they lose a lot. They hit some, but they're going to lose most days. It's not fun. You're going to have losing months or multiple losing months, and that's just the nature of it. It's not it's not just a magical thing there's no magical betting strategy that's going to change your profitability in DFS. It's how you make the lineups. And if you make one or two lineups, you're probably going to be able to manage it way better than someone who's just entering 150 times.
You mentioned loving to be on 1%, guys. I don't want you to give away your secret formula here, but isn't it likely that guys that are owned at 1% are typically going to be pretty bad plays from a floor ceiling perspective? Like even if a guy is, like you could make a case like the first week that like the second week Robert Foster broke out, he was like 6%, right? And you'll usually get those guys in that range. 1% is like so hard to find a reasonable play in that range. Tell me that you're not finding multiple 1% plays every week that you actually think are good.
No, I think it's rare. And especially now, it used to be, again, it used to be easier, and you used to actually be able to find these guys. I remember in basketball a few years ago, it used to be that people wouldn't really play backups. They would just like only play starters. And especially when there's a big man injury, sometimes the backup actually can be better than the starter, and that just would never happen. So a lot of times you could just play these backup centers, you get them at 1% ownership, and that was that. Now that's just not the case anymore. In football as well, like people usually are going to be on some percentage of people are going to be on every viable play. But occasionally, if the chips fall right and there's just some really high owned guys at specific positions, you can find 1 to 3% on plays that I think are not like terrible.
Mhm.
So yeah, it doesn't happen. It's not like I'm looking every time, but sometimes I just find a guy and then he just happens to be 1% on. And I thought, oh, well, I didn't think this guy was going to be 1% on, but there we go.
What about when you have a 1% guy and you lose money on that 1% guy? Is it still like because you had the 1% guy, you still feel pretty good? Is that
No,
do you still give
I
the
feel
fist pump?
terrible about myself. Trust me, I don't like to be wrong, and if I do that, I'm usually very hard on myself. But when it works, it feels really good. It feels really, really good.
Okay, I want to transition to data science, and first with the intersection of
Yeah,
DFS before we get to this whole job thing.
yeah,
Um, I think, well, first of all, like I think one of the best skills that you could have as a young person today, like I have 2 kids, I think that I would never tell them what to do, but if they ask me, I think some type of computer science, computer programming, data science background would be an awesome education to have. Did you have a background in this? Do you use it for DFS? Is that how you're finding 1% plays by teaching yourself Python and R and all this stuff? How deep in the weeds are you or were you?
yeah. So I have zero background in computer programming. I dropped out of college 2 years into college, so I don't have an undergraduate degree in anything, and I didn't do it in high school, and I didn't do it in college. If I remember correctly, I think I started 3 years ago. I initially started doing online courses, and it didn't go very well, which I actually think is pretty common. Like people try things, and then it's too hard because it's too new, and then you get back into it, and eventually it sticks. And that's what happened with me. Is I took a few online courses, and I was living in the Bay Area, and then I thought, I just need more something. Like I need more accountability. I needed more structure, and I found this basically like 10-week boot camp in San Francisco, at this place called General Assembly. And there's a lot of these places everywhere, like you'd find in any city. And I ended up taking this basically course that was called Intro to Data Science. And it was with this guy who, our professor was actually 22 or 23. This really young guy. He's one of the best teachers I've ever had in anything. And he taught this course, and it was part-time. And after I was done, I could finally actually do analysis in Python. If I could, I wasn't very good, but if I got a data set that was in a CSV, I could basically just do what I call data analysis, and I might be able to implement a machine learning model. And then eventually I just kept at it, and I've gotten pretty good to the point where I'm pretty close to being able to just get a data science job. But sports is actually really people who are learning data science, probably who aren't into sports, probably wish they had something like that, because there's so much data and there's so much fun data to explore. And if you're not into sports, there's just not that much out there to analyze. You could analyze something that you're not passionate about, like health data or something like that. But to be able to look at something, analyze it, and then that analysis can turn into profit for you, that's really great. So I basically have just been learning as I've been going along, basically taking on projects where I say to myself, I want to know, for example, something I did recently, I was looking at Fantasy Labs minutes, and I said, I was looking at, does Fantasy Labs project minutes more accurately with star players or different types of players? And I basically just, if I can't do something, I Google it, and then eventually I have that analysis and I can do something with it. And it's very rewarding and actually makes it way easier to do it. And at this point, it doesn't take very long to do something simple like that.
That's interesting. I think, are you using what you learned in the course or what you've taught yourself to actually project players, or are you using it more to run the kind of stuff you just mentioned with labs and minutes?
It's a combination of both. Sometimes I'll do just analysis, and sometimes sometimes I'll do something that's in between. Like I'm trying to project a specific thing. Like, for example, I'll do something that's like an innings projection or something like that using linear regression or some sort of machine learning model. And sometimes I'll just use it to do just what I'd call exploratory analysis. So it's a combination of both. But also, a lot of public projections are really good. Like I use those as a baseline for most sports. If I could probably make my own projections in every sport, but I feel like that's a waste of time. It's almost better to just research stuff to improve upon what's already out there. So that's mainly what I do.
How much edge do you think this has created for you in DFS? And it doesn't sound like you want to continue to pursue DFS full time, but do you think this is necessary to have this type of training, these skills to play DFS for a living going forward?
I don't think it's necessary, but it's very helpful. It's really interesting listening to other players talk about what they do because people have very different approaches. Like I think Manny Laura is on your podcast and he's talking about analyzing projection systems and getting the R squared of everything, which is something that's sort of like a data driven approach. And then you listen to some people who just use Excel spreadsheets, which is pretty simplistic or so it's sort of just interesting to see that people can use vastly different approaches and still win. But for me, if I didn't have this, I probably wouldn't be winning. I need this stuff to be able to do the analysis to actually, because I think you can fall into a trap of you do something, you see a result, you do something, you see a result, and then you have this cognitive bias. You think those results mean something, but a lot of times they don't. That's something I learned from poker is you can lose a lot or you can win a lot. It doesn't have anything to do with your strategy. So to be able to actually do data analysis where you're actually getting the result, okay, does this factor actually have signal for a machine learning model to predict fantasy points or predict minutes or predict rushing yards or rushing touchdowns? And you can see the actual results. And sometimes I'm really convinced that something's going to matter and then it doesn't. And there's some things that you just can't like logic out, and like doing the math and actually seeing if the things are correlated is just going to be way more effective.
I'm curious if you pursued this job thing, this data science thing, because you thought that the DFS ecosystem was kind of running its course already. Because I think, well, I still think the DFS games are good. And I think even if you look at poker, I mean, poker first got popular in 2003 or 2004. And if you're willing to play live and kind of seek out some games now, I think you can still find really good games in poker. So I'm curious where you're at on kind of the future of DFS, if you're optimistic or pessimistic for how long this would be something people can do for a living or for at least some type of supplemental income.
Yeah, so it's interesting to compare poker and DFS in terms of the arcs of like how quickly poker became difficult versus daily fantasy. Poker actually, in my view, was kind of slow. It was, there was multiple years from like 2003 to 2006 where it was really easy. And then 2006, it got harder because the UIGEA. But still, there was 5 years where I was still beating it, and there's a lot of people who are still beating it pretty easily. Daily fantasy, the arc has been really much quicker. There was a few good years where it was really big, and then it got really tough really fast. And I'd say it certainly is pretty damn tough. And I definitely feel like it's still very beatable, and I'm going to still keep playing it, and I'm going to actually play it more in this year. But I live in the Bay Area, and in the Bay Area, having a tech job can be as nice as being self-employed, at least from what I hear. I don't have that experience yet, but you go into these offices and it's like there's foosball tables and ping pong tables and open floor plans, and people are just hanging out and chatting.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I went in for this interview at this one job in Palo Alto, and after the interview was done, I was just hanging out with people who were supposedly working, and they were just like not really doing anything and asking me about poker, and we are just chatting, and there's like nice beanbag chairs, and I just thought, wow, this would be a nice life. Like why am I like busting my ass at home, like doing all this like and I guess one appealing thing as well is just, with gambling or daily fantasy or poker, everything you do is so high stakes. You make a mistake, it's going to hurt bad. You're going to just lose money. If you do something well, you're going to make a lot of money, or you might not. You still might lose money. And there's something appealing to me that I could just do work and then relax, and there's nothing's going to happen. If I made a small mistake, I can just fix it, and that's it. And there's just something that's really appealing about that to me. And, there's just more security with it. I get a data science job. I will probably be able to get jobs in data for the rest of my life. And with daily fantasy or sports betting, once it ends, what am I going to do? I don't know. I was lucky with poker that I was able to transition to something new that had such a parallel to it, but I don't know if there's going to be something like that after daily fantasy. I just don't know.
You realize you're describing like the exact opposite viewpoint of 99% of people listening to this.
Right.
They're all working. And I think, I've had plenty of jobs where it just feels like the better I do, I don't get compensated more for it. The worse I do, I don't get penalized for it. It is what it is. And you describe that as a positive. To me, it's kind of disheartening to be like, well, it doesn't really matter that much. Like, I love that when I play DFS or I play poker, if I play well, hopefully I'll be rewarded. If I play poorly, I'll be punished. Like, that kind of appeals to me. That seems morally just in the world, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. I get a lot of friends who give me this feedback too. They say to me, "You're looking for a job,
Yeah.
like you don't know how good you have it." And maybe just the grass is greener on the other side. But that being said, I think in the Bay Area specifically, these jobs it's a lot easier. It's a lot more fun. You're in the middle of the city. I just think there's definitely appeal to it. I don't want to work in a cubicle. Like, I don't want to work in the like tech company from Office Space, but I do want to work at the tech company that has the soft beanbag chairs and the foosball tables. So
you are obsessed with these beanbag chairs. You should just get a beanbag chair for your apartment.
No, I have an uncomfortable couch instead.
I'm curious, when you go for these jobs, are they like, well, Jesus, Max, what the hell you been doing for the last 15 years with your life? This is a massive hole in your resume. How can we hire someone who didn't finish college? And, I assume some of these companies don't really get it. They're like, well, why we hire this dude who's been gambling for 15 years?
Yeah. So luckily and unluckily for me, data science jobs are very merit-based. You actually have to do a project as part of the interview. So there's one job I applied for, which was this app that was like a micro, or maybe not micro lending. It was like a payday lending app, except this is the most San Francisco company ever, but they would lend you money, but they wouldn't charge interest. They would just ask the person to give a tip to the company when they pay it back. And they actually were a profitable company. And I had met this guy who was the head of the, I think the data analytics team at this company through a data science meetup that I go to in San Francisco. And he's like, just apply for the job. Like, I think you're smart. We'll see. And then they gave me this project, and they gave me this set of random sales data, and they had to answer a bunch of questions about it. And at that point, they look at the results and they don't really care what your background is. If you do a good job, you do a good job. They think that you can do it. That being said, I actually did probably, I was very close to getting the job, and the head of the team wanted to hire me. And then one of the higher ups didn't, because of all the things he stated, my weird background. And so I didn't end up getting the job. Another job I applied to, which is a very cool company, and I was very close to getting it. I was probably one of maybe 2 or 3 people who were in the running for the job. And it was this company that's called Pando Pooling. And I think this is a brilliant idea. They go to young baseball players and young athletes who are in the like minor leagues, and they try to get them to, what you would say in poker, like swap action with each other for their career. So there's players who are in the minor leagues right now who are basically on a team with other players where they are kind of trading like 10% of their earnings. So if one of them gets really rich, the other guys are getting some of that money. And to them, my background was really great, because they're like, wow, you've been sports betting, you've been like actually making money doing sports analysis. This is the exact type of person that we want. That being said, they probably needed someone a little more polished, like with an actual degree in computer science or a PhD or something like that. And I was just a little not polished enough, so I didn't end up getting that one either. But I actually don't think my background, if I look at the right company, doesn't actually hurt.
So now the plan is no more jobs. You're going back into the
no,
DFS streets.
Sort of. Well, so I just acquired this company called SaberSim with my brother and another daily fantasy player. His name is Giant Squid, who's just an amazing computer programmer. And the founder, whose name is Matt, is still staying on. And I'm going to actually work for that company as a data scientist and part-time. And I'm also going to do daily fantasy part-time. So I'm going to actually do more daily fantasy, and I'm going to be involved in this company. So I sort of half got my job, and I sort of half didn't.
Well, that's the best way to get the job, right? Just buy a company and then grant yourself a job.
Very good point.
It's
a
surefire way to get the job.
Right. And I can't get fired. So even if I do a poor job.
I'm curious what your take is on sports betting. Obviously, sports betting has been going on in this country for a very, very long time. I think the environment for a lot of people has changed due to the legality. Here in Pennsylvania, it's legal. In New Jersey, right over the bridge from where I am, it's legal. I saw you with your brother at the DraftKings Sports Betting National Championship, which I completely butchered, but you guys did great and got second place.
Well, no, let me clarify. I did not do great. I was in the tournament. I was out on the first day. I just started going all in, basically, until I busted, and I busted quickly. Danny ended up getting second, though, and basically like didn't lose a bet. It was an insane run.
Right. I do want to get your take on the strategy on that quickly for a second, but I'm more curious first what your overall view is on sports betting, because I find sports betting extremely fun. Like watching a game, have some money on it. It's really, really fun. However, I have not found it to be the same as the enjoyment or the thrill or the edge that I get from peer-to-peer stuff like poker, like DFS. I think that the lines, although maybe they're not completely efficient, certainly in some markets like futures markets and prop markets, they're not that efficient. But in terms of game lines and totals, I think are extremely, extremely efficient. And we're almost very close to 50-50. Like even if you're awesome, maybe you gain 2% here or 1% there over the house. So I'm curious what you think about the future of sports betting, and if you are going to dabble in actually trying to bet for a profit.
Oh, I am absolutely going to be sports betting this year, especially on baseball. And I think sports betting is going to evolve. There's clearly going to be more than just these. I mean, I think DraftKings is already sort of bringing this innovation to the space, and in FanDuel as well. And it's probably going to there's going to be new games and new things, just like daily fantasy is a new game. There's going to be new types of sports betting. And I think the space is going to get really big and grow really fast. There's probably going to be a lot of money in it. But it's interesting. I just don't think there's ever going to be anything that's like poker or like daily fantasy initially again, just because people are so smart now, and this is why I think having just a computer programming and or some sort of knowledge in that space or data science is really important because, you know, there's going to be new games, but the people who have that background are going to be able to beat it so quick. And there's just going to be less time to figure it out and figure it out by feel. But I'm really optimistic about sports betting. I think it's going to get really, really big, really, really fast as soon as more states legalize it. Yeah, it's going to be huge.
Yeah, the DraftKings Sports Betting Championship I thought was an awesome event, and whatever people say Adam's just shilling for DraftKings. I'm really not. It was
No, it was great.
It was
really
yeah,
great.
it was awesome because it was the peer-to-peer element that I like, and there was a lot of strategy, and I butchered the strategy because I think I just overestimated the amount that you would need going into the final day to give yourself a chance to win. And there were so many hedge opportunities, like just staying alive, similar to, and I don't know, maybe you feel differently, but it sounds like you had a similar strategy to me. But like staying alive, similar to a poker tournament, just gives you so much more optionality. In other words, we could have hedged if we were, as you eliminate people from the field and you get deeper, and your bets mean more in terms of getting onto the leaderboard, and therefore you could hedge outside of the tournament. You could swap with somebody. There's so many more options that you could gain by staying alive, just like in a poker tournament. So to that end, the strategy that I had, which was to try to hit some high stakes parlays, to hit some long shot money lines, et cetera, and busted me pretty quickly, was a mistake, I think. I'm curious what you think coming out of it.
So my strategy going in, I think, was different than yours. I max bet for like my entire bankroll the first game, and then I max bet again. And my thought was sort of, okay, this is a top heavy tournament, so I'm going for first. And I'm going to need eventually some amount that's going to be at least $50,000, maybe a lot more, maybe less. But I thought it's not going to hurt to get to like $20,000 the first night, which was my goal. And so that being said, with the opportunity to parlay, you could basically just waited the whole tournament until the end and tried to parlay a bunch of things and then been able to calculate what you needed. And I think that's a viable strategy too. I thought the strategy was really interesting. I wish DraftKings simplified it a bit and was more explicit about betting limits and maybe limiting parlays and so on and so forth, or limiting live betting, because I think it made it a little too complex, and actually having some simplicity would have made the tournament golf better and probably would have been better for them as well. But it was a lot of fun. It was really cool watching Danny, my brother, who ended up getting second, just all the little things that happened and the strategy going in and how he chose his bets. And it was really fun. And then watching the games, it was really funny. The guy who won, who just seemed like an amateur, I think. And he had a hoodie that said, maybe it was Eagles first. No, maybe God was first. I don't remember. There's family, and there's the Philadelphia Eagles, and there's God, and they're in some order. And I don't know if God would have been very happy with the order, but he was the guy. He was like going crazy when the Eagles covered. It was just a sight to be seen. So
yeah, actually, I saw him and I was like, I think I know that guy, and I couldn't put my finger on. He didn't recognize me, I don't think. And then later it came to me like he was like a dealer at Parks or Borgata or something. Like he had dealt poker to me before, which happy for him, man. That was amazing.
yeah.
All right, you said it all. You have not inspired me to get a job, a real job, but you may have inspired me to try to teach myself or find somebody to help me learn computer science. Because as I said, I think it's super important, and maybe my kids will do it one day and they can teach me. Because yeah, I think it's one thing that if I could go back, I would have definitely. Like when I was in college, man, I just tried to take the easiest classes possible. Like that was my whole goal. And like looking back, it was so stupid. I should have taken something that I think would have been useful, like computer science. So
Yeah, and there's a lot of good resources online. I think one really great one is Code Academy. Like I'd highly recommend that if someone's trying to get into it, but there's boot camps everywhere. I think, you know, for me when I was starting, it was really frustrating because I'm not used to being a novice in something.
Mm,
Um, Even when I was doing poker, I started when I was 17, so I don't remember being bad at it. I just remember I got good and I just felt like I had some expertise. And then with daily fantasy, I felt like with poker, I already just had some expertise in that type of thing. And so I didn't feel like a novice. But when I started computer science, and I think I took this like Coursera course in R, and I was 3 weeks in and I had no idea how to do this one section. And I ended up just quitting the course because it was too hard and it was really frustrating. But if you just stick with it, eventually, even as an older guy, you like most people are going to be able to get it and be able to do something. And there's so many good online resources now. There's so many boot camps. There's things you can do. You can do an immersion course. They like you can learn it. It's not like it's difficult, but it's not impossible.
hmm Yeah, definitely
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. We're not going to do any listener questions today, guys, because I don't know if you guys were distracted by the Odell trade, by the Le'Veon Bell deal, et cetera, et cetera. But we did not get many good questions. So,
Well, it was funny. I think my girlfriend put some Twitter questions, and it made me think of how you're talking to someone about like who is the guy Jeff Collins, I think,
yeah,
about whether or not your your significant other or girlfriend is into
yeah.
sports. And my girlfriend's actually very into basketball, so it's interesting listening to that part, and super into LeBron James. So I tell her, I'm like, oh, we used a lot of LeBron tonight, and she's like, oh, good, great. Like she's super pumped about it. So it's interesting, just a different perspective. Sometimes it's fun if your girlfriend likes
Oh,
sports.
for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Tell the people where they can find you, where they can find your stuff, and where they can find the new project. They can find you coding at the company you bought, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So I'm Max Steinberg on
Uh-huh.
Twitter, which I'm actually, I think I'm terrible at Twitter. I feel like I should have more followers and I'm just not funny or clever or have useful information. So, but that's my Twitter. The company I bought is called SaberSim. Um, and they're particularly a great company for fantasy baseball. So shameless plug.
hmm
I think they're great for that. So yeah, sabersim.com. That's where I'm going to be working, and I own that company. I'll probably be doing content for them as well. And also Alameda, California is where I live. So you can find me maybe at a random restaurant or bar there. Who knows?
Just go searching Alameda for beanbags, and you'll find Max on one.
Sadly, there are none.
All right, Max. Thanks for coming
Yeah.
on. Really appreciate it. And for Jerry, for Max, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody. We are promoters at DraftKings and also avid fans. Our usernames are Adam Levitan, Al Smizzle, and CSU Ram 88. We may sometimes play on our personal accounts in the games that we offer advice on. Although we have expressed our personal view on the games and strategies in this podcast, they do not necessarily reflect the views of DraftKings, and we also may deploy different players and strategies than what we recommended in this podcast.